All right. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Untherapeutic. We're kicking off season 3 with Dr. Angela Jones, and I'm super excited because this is a topic that if you've been in a relationship, currently in a relationship, you've dealt with to some
Mhm.
extent because trust is such an important topic. But before we dive into the actual subject of trust, Dr. Jones, please just kind of share us a little bit. Tell us about yourself, your practice. You're located here in H-Town. We're currently getting over a hurricane. So,
Yeah, yeah. Well, welcome to H-Town. This is like my 7th or 8th hurricane I've been through, so it's not a thing for me.
yeah.
Like, it doesn't matter what category it is, you just have to be prepared for something, but, I wasn't born in Houston, I was raised in Houston. I've been here since I
Mm,
was 5. I do have a private practice, off of I-10, and it's kinda close to IKEA, so I would say, like, Spring Branch area. I do have a PhD and I specialize in sex therapy, relationships. I also see individuals as well for the anxiety, depression as well. But if you ever needed anything extra in regards to the realm of intimacy,
mm.
sex, I'm your girl. I've been practicing in private practice for about 8 years, but I've been in the mental health industry for about 17 years. So I've kind of seen a lot, corporate, non-corporate, private practice. I've kind of worked the gambit. So I have a
Yeah.
lot of experiences in different spaces.
Yeah, I'm telling you. Hey, and if you're ever up too, she's
Mhm.
on Isaiah Factor at 10:30 at night.
Yes.
So we will include some links, obviously, at the end. I'll definitely, include that contact information for anyone who wants to get in contact with you. But, today we're talking about this subject of rebuilding trust. And, the
Mhm,
reason why I say every couple will have to deal with this in some shape, form, or fashion is because
mhm,
no one's perfect, and I always say
mhm.
this, no one's perfect. Obviously, there's levels to when trust is broken, but the truth of the matter is at some point in some relationship, you're going to be tasked with rebuilding trust.
Yeah.
I want to start off because people will reach out and say, "Man, I want to trust. I want to get back to a place of trust in my partner." Let's
Mhm.
start with the basics. To you, when someone says trust, what does that mean?
See, that's tricky, right? Because it really depends on what trust is for you, and it's not as generic as most people think, because what people feel distrustful for in one relationship may not matter in another space. So
Mhm.
it really depends on who you pick and what type of person you want in your life, and what is it that who you want to share life with. So trust is overall really about consistency and reliability, but in regards to relationships, it just really depends
Yeah.
on what it is that you need and what you're looking for in a partner. So, to define what trust is, like I said, it could be just reliability, consistency, things of that sort. But it's reliability and consistency in what exactly? And that's usually where it kind of gets tricky, especially if you don't communicate that with your partner,
Mhm.
because then they can break your trust and you wouldn't even know it. And you'll just be like, oh, I didn't realize.
Yeah, somebody out
Um,
there, a totally different definition of trust. It's like, "What, you don't
mhm,
trust me?" So, when
right.
you think about it though, in your experience, when people say, "Man, I don't trust you," the first thing that pops up in people's mind is infidelity and cheating.
Mhm,
But where
absolutely.
where do you think trust is lost most
In relationships,
in relationships?
honestly, like you said, the first thing that pops in people's mind is like infidelity, and that's usually a bigger one, right? But I think it's lost most in our day to day white lies that we tell.
Mm,
And that usually is shown in consistency. So if you're someone who always comes home at 5 and all of a sudden you start not coming home at 5, that kind of creates a sense of distrust because you've been consistent in one place. So I actually think it starts out in these what we call like water droplets
mm,
in a bucket. And so these drops of lies, white lies, inconsistencies, you're not reliable. I think that's where it happens the most because
mm.
then when something like a big one like infidelity happens, that actually helps you or not helps you when something big like that happens. So
Yeah.
if someone is always consistent, always reliable, and then boom, infidelity, and it's not boom, but infidelity happens, and you actually can gravitate and hold on to the water droplets and ask yourself, okay, but is this person, have they always been a
Mhm.
certain kind of person in my life, and what does that mean, and do I want to forgive them or not? It just really depends.
Yeah, I just to that end, you talk about like the forgiveness piece.
Hmm.
How much of it is like what they do and maybe some of these issues that we come into the relationship with, you know? Because some of it seems pretty, I don't want to say simple, but it's like, hey, I'm changing, I'm a different person now.
Hmm.
But the other person may still struggle with trusting them. And a lot of times it
Absolutely.
may be something unrelated to them. How do you
Hmm.
tell, or even what do you do if someone comes into the relationship already from a place of distrust?
You have to work on yourself first. Usually, if we come into a relationship and we already have trust issues before we actually really get to know the person that we're dating or really give them a chance, that means you have some things in your past that you haven't resolved or you haven't really understood as to why you feel that way. I mean, I've actually was reading something, and my friend was talking about it, that trust can happen as early as that moment when you're a baby and you're put into the nursery rather than sleeping with your mother, because it creates like that sense of abandonment.
Mhm.
Or when your mom says they're going to pick you up from school at 5 and they actually come and pick you up at 5:30
Mhm.
and you're the last kid. So this trust thing can happen, and it can actually stem back so far that a lot of us don't really even understand where it comes from.
Yeah.
And so it really depends, but in essence, I'm saying like we have to address our past.
Yeah. Do you think it's fair that we all come into relationships with a little bit of distrust?
Is it fair? I would say it's I don't know if I would use the word fair. I would say it's realistic. I
Yeah.
would say that is probably the case. There is some sense of distrust somewhere. You just got to figure out what it is.
Yeah. It's one of those things, I think about like when you break a leg and even though you can repair it, like that leg still just isn't the same, you
Right.
know? I mean, you can function, but after a certain point, you can tell, hey, this is where I
Mhm.
hurt myself. Do you think you can get back to a place of 100% trust if someone has, let's say the big things, right? Whether
Mhm.
it's fidelity, say someone take money out of account,
Mhm.
or you know, just whatever. I mean, it could be so diverse in terms of the issues. But do you think you can get back to a place to where like I trust this person 100% after it's been broken?
So the trick in the question you're asking is the word back, right?
Yeah.
There is no back, right?
Mm,
Once betrayal happens in a relationship, it's almost like your relationship is now on a different trajectory. And that
mm,
trajectory is now we're creating a new sense of trust. So you're never going to go back to what it was. So if someone steals money from your account and you forgave them, you're going to give them another chance. You're not on the same trajectory anymore. You're on a whole nother, it's kind of like, I guess if you watch comic book movies, it's like you're in
mhm.
a whole nother life multiverse in that moment, and you're in the space of building trust in this new space. And what 100% looks like in that new space will not look like what it did back then. But
Yeah.
yes, you can get to 100%, but you have to understand 100% is something that you have never actually experienced. It's a new 100%.
Yeah.
So when you have mhm,
Couple How do you help couples define what that new 100% is? Because this is like new territory for them, I'm sure. You come
mhm,
in, and so many times I know you hear people say, man, I just want to get back to how things were. It's like, how things were kind of is what led you to where you are. So you don't want to
mhm,
quite get back to that. But
mhm.
how do you start over?
Well, I have a person I am seeing right now, and their spouse was unfaithful,
Mm,
and they keep saying, "Well, how do I make them be this person that I want them to be?"
mhm,
And the problem is were they ever that person?
mm.
And so, in order for a
In their
couple,
minds, they were, I'm sure.
no, and they can actually stop and pause and say, no, they never actually did that.
Yeah.
So the expectation of what it is that you want from your relationship or the partner, you have to be realistic about the person you're looking at, right? Like, what do I want? What does this new 100% of trust look like? Well, first, let me ask myself, who am I actually with?
Yeah.
Right? I can't expect something from somebody who doesn't have it in them, or if they don't have the desire to be that person either. So if someone is saying, well, I want someone who is more reliable and gets to come home at a certain time after work because it creates a better schedule for the family. We can eat dinner together. I just want that type of life. However, this person is an airline pilot.
Mhm.
It's like, okay, but what are you trying to do here? You're trying to change the actual person, and that's going to create resentment. That's going to create disappointment. And so you're 100% sometimes, and I notice 100% sometimes at initially before therapy is unrealistic for both
Mhm.
parties,
Yeah.
for the person who betrayed and the person that felt betrayed. And so to
Yeah.
define that is to know who you are actually with.
Mhm.
I can't expect my dog to start walking on 2 legs just because I want him to when they've always walked on 4. That's what it is. And I have to ask myself, am I okay with that?
Yeah.
You know?
What if so let's say they're not an airline, and
Mhm.
they actually have the quote like resources, let's just say like,
Mhm.
hey, I just want to spend time. I want you to plan a vacation.
Mhm.
I see you plan everything else in life.
Okay.
And then when it comes to us, all of a sudden you kind of lack the ability to do it. What
And
about when that's a
mhm.
limitation? It's like it's not them in the relationship per se, but it's not because it's not them altogether, you
Right.
know?
And that's a fair question, right? Especially if you have evidence that they're able and have the capability to plan in other spaces in their life. You're just saying, I'm just trying to have you implement that same energy with us, right? I want you to
Mhm.
have that same energy of excitement and planning with us. Then I feel like that is a fair request. Now, it
Yeah.
is the responsibility of the partner to to be honest and say what is causing them not to do it, right? And sometimes it could be as simple as I just don't like to. And I'm not
Mhm.
saying you have to accept it, but we have to understand where they're coming from. Or it
Yeah.
could simply be like, well, the last time I planned something, you seemed really unappreciative and I don't want to plan it anymore.
Mhm.
And then now we're having a whole different kind of discussion, right? And so I think that that request is fair, and the fact that they came with evidence, hey, you do this for your job, I've seen you do this for your friends, but you don't do this for me. That's a fair request. And now we have to have a conversation about it. But the request is fair. And I feel like there should be some kind of resolution as to, okay, so how can we get to a place where you are energetic and excited about planning something for us, where I don't have to ask you what needs to happen. And then
Mhm.
what they'll notice is that this is not just like you need to plan something, it's the whole environment has to shift in order for something to happen, and
Mhm.
including the person that was betrayed. And that's the part that's hard because when you're betrayed, you kind of feel like, I
Yeah,
don't want to,
you need to do all the work,
you. And so it becomes a two-party issue rather than just a one-party issue.
Yeah, you're right. It is so difficult, because if you kind of introduce that too soon, then the other person doesn't feel heard or vindicated in their
Mhm.
frustration. It's like, no, the issue is he doesn't plan or she doesn't plan, and now
Mhm.
you're saying I'm responsible for them not planning. And I know
Right.
that's not what you're saying, but I
Mhm.
agree 100%. You do kind of have to look at that whole picture,
Yeah,
and that's where it gets tough. Going
it
back to
is.
the, last time I planned a vacation, you had something to say, like even in that, right? It's kind of, yeah, because I could just hear like five couples in my head. So what? You don't want me to say anything to you?
Right.
you know?
And then that would then open the door for like, okay, it's okay for you to tell me you're disappointed, but the way you communicated it, and then that talks about communication. That talks
Mhm.
about how to be honest, right? How come you never told me you felt that way? And that happened 2 years ago. And then we start talking about like the lack of communication, the lack of transparency. And it's no longer about them not planning something. It's about the energy that me and you are providing for one another to create an environment of trust,
Mhm.
of honesty and feeling safe in it.
It's tough. You find yourself going down this rabbit hole. It's like, man, I swear we were just talking about
Yeah.
vacation.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're like 3 years, you know?
I know when people come into the office and they're like, no, 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 this is about them not planning something. I'm like, it's not that simple, right?
It's not.
Everything, you come to therapy, we break everything down and
Mhm.
we're gonna help you see that this is not just a black and white issue. Now,
Yeah.
granted, there are some things that are black and white. And we have to address those too, but most of the time it's not.
Now, even when it is black and white, I've seen, and again, this is such a delicate topic when you talk about infidelity or cheating, because I mean, it's clear it's wrong.
Hmm.
But when you kind of work through some of the relational issues, m- on average, it just doesn't happen overnight. You
Right.
know, there was a buildup. And not even saying that these, makes it okay or kind of legitimizes why someone is doing something.
Hmm.
But at some point in the conversation, you're going to have to look at the relationship as a whole. You
Hmm.
know,
Absolutely.
you know, we talk about the black and white issues, but what about when it's not black and white? This one comes to mind for me is like trusting someone's motives.
Mm.
And I always use, because this comes up, is like, say I'm moving and I'm like, hey, I'm doing this for the family. And you really are questioning, like, is this about the family or is this some personal agenda that you're trying to, accomplish? You're trying to, show, outdo your friends. You're trying to, whatever. It could be.
Mhm.
Now, on the surface, it's positive. We're not saying anything egregious like
Mhm.
infidelity or stealing. No, this is technically a positive thing, but you really are having difficulty trusting, I guess, the intent,
Mhm.
motives of what that person is saying. How do you navigate that space?
Usually the reason we don't trust people's intentions is because we don't trust
Mm,
something or something has happened. And um so like even the example that you gave, like, hey, we're gonna do this because it's best for the family. That that's true, but that doesn't mean that's the whole truth, right?
mm,
And what you would like is for that person to be more transparent. Like, yeah, I think it's great for the family, but I also think it'll be great for me. And I think it'll be good for my career or whatever the reason is, and that's when it creates on that's when trust is actually built, when you actually are able to say, hey, no, this is good for the family, but it's also good for this. Or and then if you're like, no, I think you're trying to showboat for your friends or something like that.
mhm.
And if they are honest and you have an honest relationship, that person will be like, yeah, maybe a little bit, probably.
Yeah.
But
You almost could appreciate it more if they were just like straight up.
exactly, just being honest. But the thing is that we most of the things that we do is has some kind of self in it, most
Mm,
of them, right? And even in families, like even with your children, even with your spouse who you 100% devote yourself to, there's always self in there. And
mhm.
when people act as though there isn't, that's the problem, because that's being dishonest even with yourself, right?
Yeah.
Right, to say like, I want to have children because it's I don't know, you could give whatever reason, but maybe you want to have children because your other friend just had a kid too, and you don't want to feel left out. There's the truth in that too. So the thing is that we have to be honest with ourselves and stop trying to make ourselves seem like this very noble, like ultra sacrificing. I'm doing this for you.
Everything I do is altruistic. It's not about
Right,
me.
right. And most of the time there is self in it and there's nothing wrong with that. But
Mm.
there is something wrong with trying to convince someone who knows you that they're wrong in the fact that it may have something else or there's something else in it.
But how do you get someone to have that level of self-awareness? Because in their
Mm.
mind, they actually may think this is 100% for the family, you
Mhm.
know? And you don't want to say, come on, man, your buddy just did this and now you're trying to compete, because then obviously that creates division. Even having the conversation just requires a degree of self-awareness. So
Right.
where do you encourage that without approaching it like you got all the answers?
So if we're talking about like in a romantic relationship,
Mhm.
there's a I think his name is Dr. Peterson something, I don't know. But he says something, there's a thing in relationships called like silent tolerance, right?
Okay.
And silent tolerance is basically I am tolerating some things even though I know the truth, because sometimes I'm not the right messenger for whatever is happening right now. And in relationships, we sometimes see through our partners in some instances, not in everything, but in some things we're
Most
just like,
of the time, though.
right, but is it really healthy for you to point it out every single time? Probably not, right?
Yeah.
So in those type of dynamics, you have to really ask yourself, am I the right messenger for my partner for them to help see themselves or to become more self-aware? Hence
Mm.
where we come into play, like a therapist,
Yeah.
or if they have like a mentor that they trust, might be a better messenger for that, right? And
Mhm.
so, but as someone who is in love with someone or in a relationship with someone, we think sometimes we're the best messenger and we're not, right? Like the fact that I'm a therapist and I'm married, oh, I can say a whole lot to my husband, right? But I'm not always the right messenger. And most of the time I'm not because there is some self in it, right?
Mhm.
I want
Yeah.
you to do this because it's gonna probably make my life easier, but I also want it for you too.
Yeah.
And it
I'm
it
definitely
kind of
not gonna
creates
say nothing that makes my life harder.
right, right. So, in order to help someone that you're in a relationship with, to help see themselves, ask them like, who do you trust, and who would you? I feel like you need someone to talk to about these type of things because obviously I'm not the right person for you, but I'm just letting you know what I see. But it, it's tricky in a relationship. It just
Yeah.
really is. It really is tricky.
That's what I always say. They're so nuanced. And I always love slash I'm being facetious. People get online and it's just like black or white. Like if this person doesn't do that, then this is, and I'm like, man,
Right.
I get it kinda, but it's so
Hmm.
nuanced, especially when you spend countless hours working with couples. You
Right.
see all the intricacies of it.
Absolutely.
One of the things when it comes to, let's just say, healing, right?
Hmm.
So there's this element of time oftentimes that I talk about with couples, right? There has to be a certain amount of time. I can't say what that time is, it's not a
Hmm.
time limit, but I do know that there's time involved. And
Yes.
traditionally, the person who's done something has a shorter timeline than the person that's actually
Absolutely. Yeah.
healing. It's like, come on, man, we gonna get over this.
Right.
Mm, But then there comes this point where people feel like, okay, you're using this against me. You bring it up, at these times when I challenge you on something, or whenever I, ask you something that you may be uncomfortable with, you bring up something I may have done in the past. How do you navigate or reconcile that? Like on one end, there is no time limit. But
Mhm.
then on the other extreme, are you using kind of what I did 10 years ago, 15 years ago
Mhm.
against?
And usually in those type of conversations, like, my wife or my husband keeps bringing up something I did 5, 10, 15 years ago. Most of the time they bring it up in situations that are not even related to what we're
Oh, yeah.
discussing right now. And it's usually because it's the point of the timeline that I was speaking of earlier that you shifted in their mind.
Mhm.
So they keep referencing back to the point where you changed for them. And I'm not saying that it's fair for them to do that, and it's not.
Yeah.
You have to realize, like, whenever you do something that I guess what we say is what triggers a feeling that makes them feel distrust or unsafe, they revert back to that moment where their timeline shifted for you.
Mm.
And they're bringing that up every single time, like, "Yeah, but remember 10 years ago when you
Mhm.
did XYZ, that's why I think this is going on right now," because what in that moment, they realized you are not as consistent as they thought you were.
Yeah.
Now, as far as, like, how do you address it with them to make them stop continuously bringing it up? That's tricky. I'm just gonna be honest, it's tricky because if you are consistently doing things that are, related to what you did 10 years ago, right?
Mhm.
If you cheated 10 years ago, but you are consistently flirting, you haven't cheated technically, but you are a very flirtatious person, you know, you have to actually see that being a flirtatious person is a problem,
Mhm.
so you do have to do some self-reflecting. Am I representing the person that I told that person I was representing?
Mhm.
And also you can ask them like, what can we do for you to stop doing that?
Yeah.
Because it's really frustrating and it just makes me want to throw my hands up and be like, whatever.
Mhm.
So that's why I say it's tricky because it's not like an answer.
Yeah.
Um
It's
to that.
nuance. I wrote this blog on this, and that's like the first thing that I put in there about rebuilding trust is like the problem has to stop. So many
Mhm.
times people talk about rebuilding trust while they're kind of quasi still doing the thing. And it's like,
Exactly.
we're not going to make any type of progress. And again, I not speaking to that person, but let's just say the person, and again, I know it's so nuanced, the person that actually is doing the right thing and really, making intentional strides. And let's just say this is, say they got years under the belt,
Mhm.
it's kind of like, man, whenever I try to hold you accountable on something, now all of a sudden you're triggered. And
Mhm.
again, it's so nuanced because you don't want to undermine what someone is triggered by, nor can I actually be the person that says what triggered you, because
Mhm.
it could be anything.
But
But it's
as you know, we're told that people's triggers are that's your trigger.
yeah.
So you have to do something for yourself to not get triggered. You can't depend on an external person, another person to stop your triggers. It's your trigger. So if
Mhm.
you look at me a certain way and it triggers 10 years ago, I that is something that you have to ask yourself like, okay, what needs to happen in regards to me getting triggered? Because I that means you're highly depending your mental health and your mental stability on another person. You're literally putting it in their hands. And
Mhm.
you have to figure out on your own, what am I going to do about this trigger? And if that means like I don't think I can live a life with someone that constantly does this kind of thing to me and triggers me, you have to make your decision as to what you're going to do about it.
Yeah.
That can mean go to therapy, but that can mean ending a relationship. And it's but it's still yours.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I love that perspective as well too. For the person that comes to you, let's just say they got out of a bad relationship
Mhm.
and trust was kind of at the core, broken trust
Mhm.
or whatever it is. And they don't want to carry that into the new relationship.
Mhm.
What do you suggest they do during the interim? Like they're not with someone,
You already know what I'm gonna say. They need to go to therapy.
like going to alley oop.
You already know, they need to go to therapy. But here's the thing, not everyone believes in therapy. And
Mhm.
honestly, I'm one of those therapists that feels like not everyone needs therapy.
Mhm.
Okay. And so when it comes to therapy, I feel like you can do some therapeutic work on your own as well. I tell people you need to give yourself time, but don't just sit there idle. Like you need to do some work. If that means reading, go on a retreat, changing the way you eat, your diet, or just the way perspective, you have to do some work.
Mhm.
And but you have to know what you're working on. You can't just start eating a certain way and working out and hoping like miraculously you're a different person. Like what is the goal that you're trying? Because when you walk into a therapist office, you have a goal in your mind. You have a reason why you're there. And if you don't want to go to therapy, even though I think that's the best way to go, if you don't want to,
And I'm not being
then
biased.
you can't just sit idle. What am I going to do then? Okay, I don't want to go to therapy. I feel like I'm strong enough to work on this myself. Well, good for you. Well, what are you going to do? And it can look different for everyone, but you have to do something before you get into the next relationship. Otherwise, you're just going to repeat history with the next person because all you're doing is filling in the space and putting the same trauma, hurt, pain on another person, and it's going to end. And here you are again in the same space.
Yeah, you see, it's like clockwork. Dr. Angela Jones, I appreciate you so much. Where can people find you at if they want to
You
come?
can find me on Instagram at Dr. Angela Jones, or you could go to my website, which is angelajonesphd.com. Either one of those are the easiest way.
Okay, awesome. Well, listen, I appreciate you so much. Thanks so much for your time. For everyone listening, definitely follow Dr. Angela Jones, follow myself, Nic Hardy underscore NICHARDY underscore, and make sure you subscribe to the Untherapeutic Podcast. It's on all streaming platforms. So check us out as we crank up season 3.